Yes, I've finally seen it. And I also gotta say that after I reviewed the original 28 movies on my old YouTube channel 3 years ago, I never would have anticipated that Toho would get back in the game of making more Godzilla movies. So, let's start! Let's talk about this! This is my highly anticipated review for the highly anticipated Godzilla Resurgence, or Shin Godzilla, the first official Godzilla movie in 12 years. I know in the US it's being released as Shin Godzilla, which is a terrible title for us because Shin doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, yes, to us, Shin is this, but what does Shin Godzilla actually mean? Well, if you translate it from the Japanese title, it means either true, new, or God. So any one of those, except maybe God, would have been a better title than Shin Godzilla. But I also have a tendency to call Godzilla movies by their international title. And since the international title for this is Godzilla Resurgence, I'm sticking with Godzilla Resurgence. The movie opens up in modern-day Japan. Strange events start happening in the middle of Tokyo Bay, and before you know it, this giant reptilian creature climbs out of the water and starts wreaking havoc on land. The Japanese government doesn't know what this is or how to deal with it, and then through research, it's given the name Godzilla, and the rest of the movie from there on out is the Japanese government trying to figure out how to stop Godzilla and possibly destroy him. There is more to the plot than what I just described, but in order for me to talk about the other details, I'd have to spoil the movie, and I'm not going to do that. Even though the movie has been out in Japan for 2 months now, I'm not going to spoil it because most of the US has yet to see the movie, so I'm going to wait to put a spoiler review when its limited theatrical release starts in 2 weeks. As of now, this will just be a spoiler-free review. Now, the big movie critics on YouTube have a specific franchise or property that people can identify with them. For example, Chris Stuckman has Dragon Ball Z, John the Flick Pick has Batman, the Schmoes have Star Wars, Jeremy Johns has Lord of the Rings, and then for me, it's Godzilla. I am a massive, massive Godzilla fan, and to be reviewing the first official Godzilla movie of the decade is almost unbelievable. It's like when they announced that we were going to get a Star Wars Episode 7. You just couldn't believe that it was happening. Now, what exactly is the definition of an official Godzilla movie? Simply put, it just has to be made by Toho. It's sort of like with the James Bond movies. If it's made by Eon, it's an official Bond movie. And even though I really did enjoy the 2014 Godzilla, probably more than most people, this is more exciting because it's made by the company that created Godzilla. But enough setup. How is the movie now that I've finally been able to see it? Pretty good, bordering on being great. I really dug the hell out of this movie, and it's one of the first Godzilla movies in a long time to really surprise me. For one thing, the cinematography is unlike anything we've seen in a Toho Godzilla movie before. And some of the more interesting angles of cinematography in this movie have to deal with the human bits. When you watch the human scenes, sometimes you sit there and go, did Wes Anderson direct some of this? Because the shots are just very static and also very unique. For example, things are right in the center of frame, characters or objects are lined up perfectly, the camera is attached to a lot of things. It's just a really creative movie in the way it's shot. And that also applies for the action sequences. For example, in one of Godzilla's rampages, there's a rooftop in the foreground and then Godzilla in the background. When Godzilla stomps his foot to the ground, the tiles of the roof start bouncing up and down and scatter all over the place. And that's something we've never really seen in a Godzilla movie beforehand. And I think this also has to deal with the fact that this is the first Toho Godzilla movie where he's done completely in CG. No suit actors this time around, which is kind of a bummer. But because it's in CG, this allows the directors Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi to get some amazing shots that really emphasize how large Godzilla is. This is also the most politically charged Godzilla movie since 1984's The Return of Godzilla. The whole movie is basically a political commentary on how the Japanese government handles situations like this. I mean, giant monsters don't exist, but more like how they would handle natural disasters. For example, nothing goes without the Prime Minister's approval. The self-defense force cannot harm any civilians, otherwise it would be demolished and have no purpose. And Godzilla himself is a metaphor for all the shit that's happened to Japan since his last movie in 2004, like the tsunamis, the earthquakes, the Fukushima meltdown. And more than any Godzilla movie in a long time, director Hideaki Anno, who also created Evangelion, understands what Godzilla is supposed to be and uses the two important themes that Ishiro Honda used in his movies, especially in the 1954 one, and that is the theme of unity, which I've talked a lot about in my Toho month, and the dangers of nuclear weapons. So it's always great to see a Godzilla movie that really has substance rather than just Godzilla fights a monster. And because it's such a politically charged movie, it's also very dialogue heavy, which I should probably warn people, if you are not used to watching movies with subtitles, you might have a difficult time with this one, because sometimes the characters talk so quickly that I sometimes miss what the subtitles are saying, and I go, wait a minute, I missed a plot point. What's going on here? I'm confused right now. What's happening? I've personally gotten used to watching these kinds of movies with English subtitles because it's just better to watch a movie in its native language. You just take it a little more seriously. But even then, I had some trouble keeping up with the dialogue. Now, I'm talking about the cinematography, the political commentary, and the dialogue, but I'm pretty sure some people just want to know, how is Godzilla himself? How is he in this movie? He is terrifying. He is really one of the more effective Godzillas in a long time. I gotta say, right off the bat, as another warning, this is not the same Godzilla you remember growing up. If you were a longtime fan, this is a different Godzilla. I mean, for one, this is the very first Godzilla in a brand new series that ignores the 1954 original. It's a complete reboot, which means Godzilla's origin is slightly different, and there are just many aspects about him that are different overall. But it's not like in the Roland Emmerich movie from 1998, where it's so different, it's not even Godzilla. There are differences from past incarnations, sure, but at its core, it is Godzilla, and he is really intimidating. I've talked about his design in my reviews for the trailers, but it's just a really creepy design. He has these deadpan eyes, his teeth are so crooked, and he just looks really creepy with a bunch of red flesh showing. It's a really unique design. I know some people, including myself, were kind of like, I don't know about this design, but I've gotten used to it, and when you watch the movie, it's pretty effective. And this Godzilla is also tough. I remember when the 2014 movie came out, I read an article where a US military official said, if Godzilla were to ever exist, we just aim our focus at the legs, and that'll pretty much cripple him. And Toho makes this movie to pretty much say, bullshit. I will, however, say that the Japanese self-defense force in this movie is a lot smarter on how they attack Godzilla than in the previous movies, where in previous Godzilla movies, they just used everything at their disposal to fight Godzilla, and they really didn't have much of a plan. Here, they do have a plan, and one of them does involve shooting Godzilla in the legs, which, yeah, it does slow him down, but he's not going down without a fight. It doesn't really do much at all. So this Godzilla is one that's not to be messed with at all. And if I could just get back to the CG, like I said, this is the first movie where Godzilla is done completely through CG, and sometimes it's really good, even better than the 2014 movie, and sometimes even to the point where it looked like a suit actor. On the other hand, sometimes there are CG effects that are so bad, like something out of an Asylum production, that you wish they had used suit actors. And I know there's some traditions out there that just don't last forever, but since Toho mastered the craft of suit actors and miniatures, I really would have loved to see them do another one of those movies with miniatures and suit actors with CG enhancements to make some of the cheesier moments more convincing. Now I'm just gonna slide into the things that I didn't like, because No Godzilla movie, except for the original 1954 one, is perfect. They all have their flaws, and this one here is no exception. One of the things that just irritated me in this movie was there are a few scenes when the Japanese actors try to speak English, and they're really not too good at it. Probably the best actor, or actress I should say, to speak fluent English is Satomi Ishihara. She has a lot of English dialogue in this movie, and she manages to do it fairly well. And then you also have a bunch of American actors in this movie, in very small roles, who are awful. They are just terrible. I mean, the Japanese actors are really good, especially your lead, Hiroki Hasegawa, Satomi Ishihara, and the actor who plays the Japanese Prime Minister. But the American actors, no matter how small their role is, they're awful. But then again, I should probably let that slide because for a 62-year-old franchise, this has always been an issue that they could never get around. I mean, even in the films of Ishiro Honda, whenever there are lesser-known American actors, they are pretty bad. Russ Tamblyn and Nick Adams were the only two American actors in these kinds of movies to be good. I also had a slight problem with the sound design of this movie. This movie uses a lot of retro sounds from the golden age of Godzilla movies, or the Showa era, and it can be a little distracting. For example, they use a bunch of retro sounds for explosions and crumbling buildings, and if you're curious on what Godzilla's roar is in this movie, they basically just took the original 1954 roar, as well as the classic roar from 1962 to 1975, and used it for Godzilla's roar. They didn't come up with anything new. They didn't remix it like they did with the Millennium series or the 2014 movie. They just copied and pasted the roars from those classic films. And admittedly, while the fanboy in me gets a little giddy every time I hear those classic sound effects, the film critic in me gets a little irritated, especially given that the film has such crisp sound. It's a little off-putting to hear these retro sound effects in such a modern movie. Now, there is plenty more that I want to talk about with this movie. However, I would have to delve into spoilers, so I'm going to wrap things up right here. Godzilla Resurgence, to me, is really an amazing movie. It's a really great welcome for the King of the Monsters in Japan. It's really smart, it's well filmed, the action is incredible, and Godzilla himself is the most terrifying in a long time. So I definitely say that despite the problems that I have, for Godzilla fans, this movie's definitely worth seeing in your lifetime. Personally, I might need a little time to think about whether or not this is going to be one of my favorite Godzilla movies, because I'll say this right now. At the moment I'm recording this, I don't think this Godzilla movie really has that much rewatchability to it. To be honest, the 2014 movie for me has more rewatch value than this does, and I know that's not a popular thing to say, and I'll elaborate more on why in my spoiler-filled review, but as of now, it's definitely worth seeing in your lifetime, and even if you're not a Godzilla fan, you might check this one out for yourself. And that's my review for Godzilla Resurgence. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.